Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Unify Access to On-Premise and Cloud Applications in the Enterprise. My name is Chris Vies, and I'm a part of the OneLogin Channels organization, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. The purpose of today's call is to explore the identity and access management challenges organizations are confronting as they increasingly have to manage a complex application environment. At the end of this webinar, OneLogin and our partner GS Lab would like you to leave with a range of approaches as well as a solution, unified access management, that your organization could adopt to more effectively, efficiently, and most importantly, securely manage today's complex application environment. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. The webinar will be structured as a conversation, which I'll be having with our two speakers. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's speakers by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. The conversation will run about 45 minutes, probably a little longer, and we have allocated 15 minutes for Q&A. I'd now like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. First, from the OneLogin organization, Gary Gwynn. Gary is OneLogin's Senior Director of Product with more than 25 years experience in the application security and identity and access management field. Gary, thank you for joining today.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome. And also today from GS Lab, we have Mandar Garg. Mandar is GS Lab's Global Cybersecurity Practice Lead. He has more than 15 years experience in the field of cybersecurity. One of his key objectives is to help companies leverage new technologies to achieve breakthrough benefits for their organization. So to kick it off today, I'd like to turn to Gary Gwynn. And Gary, today's application environment, specifically at the enterprise level, it's often described as a hybrid environment. Can you explain what they mean by a hybrid environment and what characterizes a hybrid environment?
Yeah, well, typically when we're talking about a hybrid environment, most enterprises today are looking to the cloud for certain applications to be able to kind of leverage the modern capabilities of those applications, as well as minimize kind of on-prem deployment of application software and administration burdens. And so that puts the organizations into this hybrid kind of role where some of the software assets they're managing from a legacy perspective and an ongoing perspective are on-premises. And when I say on-premises, I'm referring not just to applications and infrastructure that's hosted in-house, but perhaps at remote data centers and even in private clouds like AWS and Azure. And so those things that are hosted in-house, that are administered in-house, and those applications and application resources and services that are actually hosted in the cloud by SaaS providers, by platform as a service providers, and other providers. And so hybrid simply refers to this modern enterprise, which has some of its assets outsourced to these external cloud providers and some in-house.
Yeah, Gary, it's interesting because a lot of enterprises that we're working with today, we see their systems of engagement, how they interact with their customers, their suppliers, their partners. It seems like almost all of them today are cloud applications. And then the back office, the systems of record, they remain on-premise applications. Is that a fair assessment?
So many of the applications that are, enterprises are adopting are in the cloud. But certainly the numbers show that the preponderance of applications are on-premise applications. And those can be commercial off-the-shelf applications, they can be open source applications, and then probably the bulk of them are actually custom domain applications, those applications that an organization creates to specifically run the business that practice is specific to their environment that the users need. And the numbers actually show, Chris, that that from an overall perspective, though the cloud application adoption is growing faster on a percentage basis, that the overall expenditure on on-premises applications will continue to be the lion's share of the spend for the foreseeable future.
An ever more complex environment. Mandar, I know you and the GS Lab organization are strong advocates for unified access management to manage this kind of environment. Could you, for our audience, just provide a quick definition or introduction to the concept of unified access management?
Sure, Gary. Sure, Chris, thanks. When you look at identity and access management, before we come to unified, let's look at what is identity access management. One, you manage the identities from an enterprise perspective. Second, you manage the access. So it's identity and access management. So you manage the access of those users or identities into various applications. Then you manage the levels of authentication and the levels of authorization within an application. You manage the user lifecycle of the lifecycle of the users within your organization. So if you look at the identity management landscape and the needs, it's a journey, and unifying the identities, unifying the access management, the policies that govern the access management across multiple applications, across your on-premise and cloud applications, and driving the authentication and authorization within the user lifecycle management all needs to be looked at as a unified landscape. And you need to have a solution that unifies the orchestration of all these aspects of identity and access management.
Yeah, Mandar, I always remember your words, centralize and simplify, and that's what you're always focused on in your conversations. Gary, I want to move to you next. How did we get to this hybrid environment? I mean, how did we arrive where we are today? Could you give a brief overview of that?
Yeah, as surprisingly, like Mandar was saying, this is a journey. And it's amazing how many conversations we have with customers that are still using mainframes. But really, that's where the journey started in the computing industry, where typically single applications or mainframe applications with monitors attached to them, green screens is what they were commonly called, originated in the enterprise to handle the business needs. The PC revolution came about in the early 80s with IBM PC and MS-DOS and Macs, and now suddenly the applications that were hosted in the mainframes are now running on desktops throughout the organization that originally weren't even connected. Then you had networking coming in, companies like Novell connecting the PCs together in meaningful ways, and then of course Microsoft with what they did. And once they were connected, we started to move into this client-server world, where on servers the applications would run, and then we'd have these thick clients that would run on the PCs. And with each of those, with the mainframe and the PCs and client-server, there were problems that we don't need to delve into today. But those problems have, in a lot of ways, gone away with the advent of the internet, HTTP, the World Wide Web, the Mosaic browser in the early 90s, and then Netscape coming along, inventing cookies with their browser, enabled session state in a way that applications could be created. And then once applications were created, the content went from kind of this static page-oriented internet to an applications-oriented internet where identity suddenly became important. And so you had the invention of products in the enterprise like CA SiteMinder and Obelix, which has become Oracle OAM, ClearTrust, Tivoli Access Manager to essentially authenticate a user in the beginning with username and password, and then allow access to those applications based on roles or attributes associated with each user. And that was fine for within the enterprise use, but suddenly we had business-to-business needs, business-to-consumer needs, and federation needs kind of crept into this, where one site needed to partner with another site, and so we had the invention of standards like SAML and WS Federation to be able to, without requiring a user to log in again or passwords from one environment to another environment, to federate identities between environments so that applications could be shared. And that all kind of paved the way for the modern cloud environment. We saw AWS emerge, Microsoft Azure, Google Apps. These emerged as cloud computing environments where applications could be provided, and then SaaS vendors themselves providing applications on the internet. And so now you have, the modern organization, the enterprise, has applications across all of these different environments with increasing complexity in terms of requirements for authentication, going from a world where username and password was sufficient to that becoming, way too complex, security breaches associated with that, MFA required. And so along comes the modern IDaaS platform, which is kind of the next generation of this SiteMinder, WAM, technologies that were on-premise technologies, but with the IDaaS vendors like LoonLogin, we're able to solve these use cases in a very meaningful way for advanced and modern authentication and access to applications that are in the cloud and on-prem. And that has led to what Gartner calls an inflection point in 2017, where when organizations are calling them looking for a modern IAM solution, they're looking more to the cloud to provide that solution than on-premise solutions that they previously looked to.
Yeah, it's interesting, Gary, because it seems like identity and access management 10 years ago was a lot simpler. But today you have a lot more tools. You talked about standards like SAML and SCIM. So there's more tools, but this environment is much more complex.
Yeah, it's very fair, and it's a very complex environment. It used to be that you could get a development team and essentially, create a username password authentication scheme using server-specific technology. Ended up creating a lot of what we call application silos and identity silos within the enterprise. And but that worked to a degree for the identity needs for applications, a decade ago. But today, with the modern environment where some of the applications are on-prem, doing forms-based authentication, some are using SAML, some are cloud-based applications, and then the increased need to do multi-factor authentication and even other authentication technologies on top of that, and automate provisioning and flows. The overall equation is simply much more complex than it used to be, and you can't roll your own solution, and kind of trying to cobble together a solution from disparate kind of vendors becomes increasingly difficult.
Virtually impossible. Nando, I know you lead a lot of digital transformation projects. And again, something that you often mention is the proliferation of applications, that there's simply a radical increase right now in the number of applications that enterprises are deploying as part of their digital transformation. And those applications, as you like to say, need to be managed. Can you expand a little bit on that, why we're seeing this increase in applications?
Yes, because today, if you look at the B2B aspects, you have many business processes. You have your Microsoft email office, you have or any other email office applications, business process applications, employee management, leave management applications. Depending upon which business you are running, you can have very domain-specific applications. So and then you have ticketing systems. If you have customer-facing applications, you are supporting those applications. You have tickets, your ticketing system. You have resolution applications. You have workflow-based applications. So for a typical organization, the applications could actually easily run into hundreds of applications. And
yeah, maybe this is I think this is a good place maybe to move to our next slide, which is what is the pain with all these applications that you're talking about? we talk about the pain of fragmentation, that on-premise world, the cloud world. Maybe this is a good place for you to follow up on that, Mandar. So what are some of the challenges from the identity and access management side that a modern enterprise is confronting?
Yeah. So the key challenges the organizations of today face, Chris, is managing the access management needs across a very, very fragmented landscape, or a landscape that is very hard to apprehend. We already talked about hundreds of applications distributed across on-premise setup as well as cloud setups. And when you want to manage identities and accesses across these applications, it's a very fragmented landscape. I'm saying so from the angle of managing user identities, their access policies, their actual access, the span of those accesses across the applications. So if you have to list down those challenges, they would be as follows. The identities today are scattered across multiple applications. So there's no central user repository or central place of truth where all the users within organizations are registered. They are scattered across multiple applications, multiple HR applications, depending upon the employee and the user size of the company. Then, even if they are organized in a directory or organized in a system, there's no proper structure to their organization. Lack of hierarchy, lack of right groups, lack of defining roles, lack of defining organizational units, and so on. Then the next thing that organizations lack today is the creation of the right access policies. By that I mean authentication and authorization policies. Which user has access to which application and at what level in that application. Then there's a lack of governance process to enforce the adherence to those policies. So the user lifecycle management, the policies of access and authorization, authentication and authorization, and the ability to ensure that those policies are adhered to all comes under governance. The next challenge that the enterprises are facing is the federation level challenges. There's no central authentication for all applications. Each application has its own user name, password requirements and enforces those requirements. There's a lack of federation of access. There's a lack of simplicity, which means that is where federation and SSO comes in when you want to simplify your operations. Then there's a limited understanding of the advanced security or the elevated security measures, which is multi-factor authentication. There's a lack of understanding that to advanced security, you need multiple levels of authentication for multiple roles within an organization. There's a lack of mapping between those roles that are specific to your organization and the roles that exist within the different IT applications. Then there's a lack of understanding that regular audits, risk assessments need to be performed by organizations. And for some organizations, there's even compliance needs. Not every organization has compliance needs, but there are different compliance standards that some of the organizations have to implement in their identity landscape. And moreover, this landscape is continuously evolving. You have different divisions within an organization which have different levels of autonomy, which have different access policies, different levels of compliance and governance, different way to evaluate risks, and different policies. And if you see above all of this has to be done across a very, very hybrid landscape. So those are the challenges I feel.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny, Mandar, because I hear from a lot of the enterprises we talk about, especially those that are depending on on-premise solutions, a common theme is the marketing department or the sales department, one of the business departments wants to deploy a cloud application. And I'm working with these legacy solutions, and he wants it deployed next week, and I have to tell him it's 4 or 5 months down the line, and I need some money to get this done. How does that fit with the modern enterprise? I mean, I can't imagine an IT individual would be comfortable with that kind of response to the business.
Correct. So in such a scenario, the IT has to really look at on-premise applications. They have to. There are certain applications that would be deployed a little later down the line, and managing the access to those applications through policies becomes pretty tough. So if you don't have, for the existing applications, if you don't have the right access policies and levels in place, then it becomes a very tough decision or tough implementation problem going ahead.
Yep. Yeah, Gary, I mean, following up on that, we talk about the pain of fragmentation and we see maintenance, cost, and complexity. But there's also a time to market penalty here as well, right? If you're dependent on a legacy environment, you're looking to deploy SaaS applications, it could take months. There's lots of constraints that arise, I believe, in this hybrid environment. Is that true?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and certainly the advent of the internet has provided much more of a level playing ground because we're talking about the user experience all within the browser to access web applications, whether they're in the cloud or hosted on premises, and so that helps facilitate. But as Mandar was mentioning, you still have issues of are these applications built to standards, to modern standards like SAML, so that you can federate sign-on into them? And then when you actually have to authenticate the user up front, what policies are you using to do that? And are those policies able to be specific, to the applications? And the different applications may have different values associated with them according to your business policy. And so can you differentiate, between them and actually require different levels of essentially strength of authentication, for the user to access those applications? And then the aggregation of the users. Where are they? Are they in Active Directory? Are they in LDAP? Are they in SQL tables in the enterprise? And how do you aggregate those so that you can have a single, essentially, directory for authentication and for the events associated with those authentications so that they can be governed?
I've seen enterprises, we were dealing with one recently that had 35 different Active Directories from acquisitions, and I'd never seen anything quite like it. I want to move to the next point and stay with you, Gary. If you're at an enterprise, we'll use the assumption that you're coming from a legacy environment. And by legacy, it could be IBM, the Tivoli, the Tim and Tam, or ISIM and ISAP. It could be Oracle, OID, OIM, NetIQ, CA. I mean, what are you looking at? What's your current state today? And what are the kind of challenges? We saw the pain of fragmentation. If you're in a legacy environment, if you've got Oracle or CA deployed, what are you looking at? What are the constraints, the pressures you're under?
Well, certainly from a standpoint of if you already have a legacy, what's called a Web Access Management or WAM solution in place, as is shown in the slide that's being presented. In certain ways, that actually provides you with conveniences because those applications that are hosted in that WAM environment are often created or already integrated in ways that allow it to play. And if that WAM solution supports SAML, for instance, you could actually delegate authentication to an identity provider that would play in the cloud applications, or the WAM solution could support SAML. But there's actually a lot of different moving parts, and so moving forward, if you're looking for kind of more of an integrated approach and to outsource to IDaaS, for instance, this sort of solution, then being able to replace that legacy WAM solution with something that's more modern and integrated with the cloud is certainly going to help you be able to integrate these legacy applications. And many of them are going to have kind of, as shown in this slide, their own proprietary kind of way of handling sessions and creating essentially cookies for users to use to access those applications. And so the solution that you're going to integrate is going to need to consider those. So you need to do an inventory of what it is in your environment, whether it's secured by a legacy WAM solution or not, whether there's siloed applications or independent applications that need to be considered, and also, of course, the cloud applications. And from that inventory, establish a prioritized plan for how you want to kind of use the modern tools available from solution providers like OneLogin to be able to integrate those.
Mandar, maybe just a last question on this slide. When you're dealing with your clients, what are their concerns when they come to you and they're looking to move away from these legacy security environments? what do they identify to you as their critical pains? What's forcing them to move? What's the catalyst here?
There are several points. One, those legacy applications are pretty complex in setup and complex to maintain. The access management part is pretty complex. Then you also have challenges with getting the right people with right skills to manage and operate on those applications. Secondly, with most of the applications and organizations cloudifying themselves, they're moving to cloud. Whenever a new business need comes up, it's very natural for organizations to look for a cloud SaaS alternative for an application. Many organizations are also moving to the cloud versions of the existing business applications. And in general, to modernize, when you're digitalizing or digitally transforming yourself, you want to utilize the cloud at its maximum potential. And the general trend is to move away from or move those legacy applications as much as possible to cloud. And in two manners. One, to use just a cloud infrastructure and move your applications to the infrastructure. And second is to actually use these SaaS applications or service, subscription-based business applications on the cloud. The other challenge is the APIs, the ability to integrate with these applications. Many of the identity and access management needs did not exist before. I mean, when the boundaries of an organization were limited to its own applications and B2B, its own employees, they didn't have to worry much about anything to do outside the firewall. So they were not exposed to good APIs, or no good APIs were exposed to those applications. Many of those legacy applications provide and position a challenge as to how to extract user and role information out of it, or how to put that user and role information into that application. And a lot of manual workarounds have to be done to make that happen. The modern applications are, just to complete the point, the modern applications make available a lot of APIs and simplicity to make that integration happen. And in the unified access management, integration of or ability to integrate across applications is very, very essential.
Yes, Amanda, I want to follow up with you on our next slide. So if I'm a CISO, a security architect, and we at OneLogin and GS Lab are meeting with these people on a weekly basis, I always hear there's a lot of solutions out there, a lot of security vendors. It's, Chris, not only do I have a proliferation of applications, I have a proliferation of security vendors. Where do I start? How do I move from a legacy environment? Yes, I know I'm in an outdated security stack that's not really supporting the business adequately. But how do I begin to move to a more contemporary security stack that's going to support my business and manage this ecosystem of identities? How would you advise a security architect, a VP of IT, a CISO? Where should they start? How should they proceed?
Sure. So typically, the approach of those architects and security folks should be to bucket their identity and access management needs into three categories or three stages. The first would be a set of basic identity and access management needs, which means one, you have a way to put all your identities in one single repository, a directory. It could be a cloud directory or an LDAP.
Then by identities, Mandar, real quick, just very quickly.
Yeah.
When you're speaking of identities, are you talking about internal employees, contractors? Are you talking about all identities?
All identities. So from an organization's perspective, whoever has application access need to have an identity. It's users. So a user can have access to multiple applications, but for an organization, it's one identity and multiple access for that identity. Okay. So when it comes to users, the second thing in that basic set of needs would be user lifecycle management. Being able to determine or being able to track the entire lifecycle and audit the entire lifecycle of a user from the time she enters the organization all the way till she leaves the organization, and even beyond in some cases. Then you need to think about access policies. policies which define which roles in the organization have access to which applications. A mapping between your organization roles and the application level roles. Then comes the basic governance in place, which means you ensure that there's a mechanism. It could be manual or it could be automated, but a mechanism to see that your policies are adhered to. And timely you do audits, you do audit reports, you do ensure that right people have access to right applications and nothing more or nothing less. Then you go to the second level of needs, which is called advanced needs, and within that you care about federation, ease of simplicity of business. So federation, you would first think of authenticating all applications against one single source, and that source is tied to your identity, and that is the reason, also one of the reasons you need a central identity repository, so that all applications within your IT environment can be made to delegate the authentication to that central identity repository. Then comes single sign-on, which means the ability to let a user log into multiple applications to which he or she has access to according to the policies in just one login name and password at one portal, So that's single sign-on. Then the next would be the third stage of needs would be the more advanced needs, where you start thinking of a higher level of security, which is multi-factor authentications. You impose policies in your organizations which say that certain roles have only single level of authentication, certain roles have multiple levels of authentications. It could be 2, 3, 4 levels of authentications, and that could also depend upon the application that you are trying to enter into. Usually, plain SSO solutions would give you the first level of authentications. You need to integrate with another multi-factor authentication solution to get the second, third, and fourth, and so on levels of authentication. Then comes the privileged identity management and the policies associated with privileged identity management. This is the management of super users. Super users and super admins have access to everything. They can really mess up things if they decide. And that's why you need to have policies that also monitor how super users are operating. Then there are other more complex policies like resetting your password periodically, having more complex passwords, and so on.
Yeah, so we know there's biometric solutions out there, UEBA solutions, CASB. There's just a proliferation of solutions out there. Gary, in our discussions with enterprises, there always seems to be a focus on this foundation of identity and access management and a governance solution, right? I need to manage my identities, I need to manage access, and I need to make sure I'm compliant with, SOX regulations. I have my segregation of duties. Should a CISO, a security architect at an enterprise who wants to begin to transform their security stack, should they focus on that foundation on identity and access management and governance? Is that the right place to start?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of depends on your job title. I mean, if you're the CISO, you pretty much have to adopt a security first posture to everything that you're doing in the modern enterprise. You certainly don't want to be the next poster child for a security breach in your industry. But a CEO is probably wanting something a little higher level than that, and the governance play, may come from the top down in terms of, give me some reports, show me according to our security policy who has access to what. And so there may be some pressure in an organization from the top down to actually, kind of have that governance level reporting and understanding of your overall security posture in place. But that becomes a really hard thing to do unless you've established the foundation underneath, which is really, when we look at the modern enterprise, as Mandar was saying, your privilege access management policies and systems in place, those super users, that's where the big breaches occur. What are you doing there? And then the identity and access management play, which users have access to what applications. And to the degree that you sanitize that you normalize it, and use what are called security design patterns, which is simplicity, single points of entry, and other security design patterns that essentially create kind of a more structured approach to where your users are, what your business policy is for access to the various applications, what authentications are you requiring, and you normalize the identity where you don't have perhaps multiple identities for the same user across your application environment, and then multiple kind of logging systems where you're having to aggregate logs from across different environments for authentications that occur to one application or one application environment versus another. To the degree that you can kind of collectively consolidate all of that into an overall identity kind of posture for your organization, then you create a nice playing field for the governance solution to come along and have meaningful reports and simplify that overall process.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying, Gary, is an identity and access management solution can accelerate an enterprise's deployment of a governance solution and also can mitigate the risk associated with that project. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's absolutely spot on.
Well, you're always simplifying things, Gary, and what I want to go into next is if you could just provide a brief overview of how OneLogin's unified access management platform could simplify things for an enterprise in today's complex application environment.
Yeah, well, a lot of the things that we've been talking about today are simplified. I'll use it again, Chris, by the OneLogin Unified Access Management Platform. So at the center of it, we have a cloud directory. And really what that means is a place to synchronize, consolidate users from across the enterprise and even outside of your organization. And so we can take users that are in Active Directory, in LDAP servers, in SQL databases, via multiple mechanisms, and automate the flows of those users into OneLogin, and automate essentially the rules that we use to map those users to applications. So based on, for instance, groups in Active Directory or attributes that are in an LDAP server or both, we automate the process of provisioning applications to those users. And then we also have user policies available where we require essentially different authentications from different users. So we can require even from different access to different applications, have different policies associated with that. So,
but Gary,
for instance,
real quick though, these policies, they're centrally managed, centrally administered, all from a single console. I don't need to, go off to some, a third-party solution to adopt the rules for that component. I'm doing everything with this unified access management solution from a single console.
Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to having the administrative tools all in a single place, the logging occurs in a single place. So as users authenticate, those logging records are all at OneLogin, and even events can be streamed out to tools for analysis, and there's a lot of flexibility provided that way. And OneLogin provides its own MFA solutions, as well as integrates with the OneLogin Protect, as well as integrating with MFA solutions from other vendors like Google Authenticator, Semantic VIP, RSA Secure AD. So we make things at OneLogin that were formerly very hard to do, actually very easy. You mentioned in the previously in the conversation, enterprises that may have 30 different Active Directory domains or even forests spread out multinationally. And at OneLogin, we can actually consolidate users from those different directories and provide a kind of a single pane of glass for user login and policies to be administered and the logging of events and access to the applications they need, whether they're on-premise applications with our OneLogin Access product or cloud-based applications via SAML and other technologies.
Gary, let me ask you a question that we got from the CISO a week or two ago. I've got 30,000 users here. I'm running Oracle Identity Manager. I'm running Oracle Access Manager. These are proven solutions. You're bringing me this cloud solution, Unified Access Management. How's it going to manage 30,000 users? Why should I be comfortable with this kind of solution? Does it scale? Will it perform? What would your answer be?
Well, the OneLogin cloud solution by design is built in a AWS modern environment with multiple regions, multinational regions actually. And so it's a completely scalable, fault-tolerant design. And that goes, kind of well beyond just saying that we're hosted in AWS. It's with our DNS providers, so that if there's any sort of a denial of service attack to via DNS or things of that nature, we can scale past those issues, and then we have internal, scalability built into it. And as an example of how we scale with our one login access solution, say we're replacing Oracle Access Manager, we don't have built in some of the kind of bottlenecks that were built into the WAM solutions that had chatty protocols going from agents to policy servers. We actually administer everything up in the one login cloud and then distribute the policy out to enforcement points that can be located anywhere the applications are. So they can be hosted on premises in remote data centers, in AWS or Azure, and those enforcement points become autonomous proxies essentially to the on-premise applications. So the whole model is built around scalability from the actual kind of authentication, creation of the policies, logging of events, to enforcement of access to applications.
Fantastic, Gary. Mandar, I want to get back to you about some of these recently deployed one login access solution packs. So these are specific targeted solutions. One is for Oracle PeopleSoft, the HR application that many enterprises have deployed. Another is for my favorite, Oracle E-Business Suite, which often forms the central nervous system for a modern enterprise, as well as the Atlassian applications, Jira and Confluence. For an enterprise, what are the benefits of these packaged solutions? Why should they be of interest to me?
Yeah, so the landscapes in all different enterprises are different. So think of a typical landscape, and the solutions or the applications that play a role in this whole journey could be different at different organizations. So one, you need to first, if you want to use the Unified Access Manager solution of one login, and which is the real way to unify your access management solution landscape, think of this. First, you need to package a solution which will let trigger an activity to collect identities from multiple systems, multiple HR systems, proprietary systems within an organization into your cloud directory. Automate all of this ingestion of identities. Then you need to have policies defined which tell which users have access to which applications. Then before you do the SSO operations, you need to automatically, based on the policy, provision the identities into those end applications into which you want to do single sign-on. So, along with Unified Access Manager solution of one login, GS Lab has a fantastic tool called XID, which actually orchestrates and automates pulling of entities from multiple applications and putting them into one login's cloud directory. And also based on the policies configured in the Access Manager, it would trigger automatic provisioning or deprovisioning of users into the end applications. Whenever there are changes in the policies, it would trigger changes in those application endpoints of the user. So users might have their access revoked or new access provisioned for new users based on the policy changes. And then you have the single sign-on connectors. So the landscapes could be different. You could have multiple user repositories from which you want to bring all of them into cloud directory. You could have multiple applications. Some of them are API-driven applications where you have out-of-the-box connectors from single sign-on, connectors from one login. And for some custom applications, you may need to write proprietary connectors. So you need to really look at a very specific customized approach for each application. And around this one login's Unified Access Manager, you have to stitch a solution using GS Lab's XID and other professional services abilities. And that's the importance of a package solution for each organization, depending on its identity access needs.
Well, I know there's a lot of interest in that Oracle EBS package solution, that's for sure. Gary, I want to step back to you. We're running tight on time here. Unified Access Management, what are the key differentiators? If you're a CISO if you're a CIO, a VP security architect, what are the things that are going to interest you in the Unified Access Management solution? Why should you care about this?
Well, I think you're going to want to make sure that when you engage any vendor in the IAM space, that they have a holistic approach to kind of the needs of the modern enterprise. And so from a unified access management standpoint, basically we're talking about both on-premises and cloud-based applications. And then all of the things that we've been talking about associated with being able to establish policies for being able to access those applications and do that in a modern way where as much is hosted up in the cloud as possible to kind of avoid the historic lengthy projects in the enterprise. I mean, a lot of the time in software projects in the past in enterprise.
Yeah. Are you going to make Oracle? Are you going to make Oracle upgrades a thing of the past?
I think that's part of the value proposition that we're trying to do here. Even within product lines, as Chris was saying, we've seen customers have a lot of pain to upgrade from version to version. And certainly that, again, is part of the value of the cloud proposition where the automatic updates are coming with the fact that you're subscribed to a service that is constantly being improved and enhanced and evolving.
Fantastic. I'd like to move to the next one, and I'm going to basically leave this. Mandar, why don't you start off, and then Gary, I'll ask you to chip in. But before we get to the audience questions, and I've got a few of them here, what are some of the key takeaways? Mandar, what would you want someone who's listened to today's webinar, what would you like them to walk away with? And we've got the things up there on the slide, but if there's 2 or 3 things additional that you'd like to add, what do you want our listeners to take away today?
Yeah. First, go for unified access management. I would reiterate that go for a solution. If organizations have come a long way in their identity access management journey, go for a solution that unifies their access management need. Choose a solution provider that understands the identity access management landscape and use the federation opportunity. If you are at that point in your journey, use the federation opportunity to implement an end-to-end unified access management solution where you centralize your user directories, you implement user lifecycle management, put access policies in place, automate provisioning, centralize the authentication, and integrate with multi-factor authentication. And the second thing I would say is go for an IDaaS cloud-based solution because that's a more modern and API integration-oriented solution. Go for simplification.
Gary, some of your takeaways?
I think, like Mandar was saying, establish a plan up front that's based on an inventory and also on your business security profile for the applications and resources that your users need to access. And then make sure that the vendors that you're working with, that they have a unified access management platform that can solve the majority of their problems and challenges, and where they don't, that they actually bring partners in that have solutions that can complement their solutions that are all pre-integrated and they work together from a partnership standpoint. That's the basis of OneLogin's relationship with GS Lab, where we've been successful in helping customers design systems that go the full way. And so we talked a lot today about kind of a single sign-on and authentication, but there's provisioning workflows, for instance, that GS Lab has helped us with. So our unified access management platform with the partner GS Lab is something that is we can deliver a complete solution to the organizations we work with.
So Gary, it's fair to say that the modern enterprise is dealing with a very complex application environment that, from what I've gathered from you and Mandar today, is only going to increase in complexity, but that there's tools and solutions out there now that, if deployed, can simplify and essentially streamline the administration of that complex application environment. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that the enterprises are like a snowflake with respect to their IAM postures. There's no two that are alike, but they're all snowflakes. They all do similar things. And certainly with the modern cloud tools that we have available, we can take very complex problems and simplify them and make them something that can be resolved within very fast time frames compared to kind of historically the time frames that have been required for this type of project, and from a cost perspective to lowering the costs.
So I want to ask some of the questions that we've received from the audience today, and I think the first one here is really a great one. What criteria, besides budget, should the C-level executives consider in the integration of different cloud and hybrid cloud systems within an organization? How does scalability of the programs play a role in the decision-making? So I think we're looking here at what things does a C-level executive need to consider as he's looking to manage this kind of application environment. Gary?
So I think that in the modern environment, security first has to be a consideration. What do you consider to be your highest level assets, and what are the vulnerabilities that you might have kind of moving into those? Obviously, if any organization is only using or has a username and password on applications, they have to be reviewing that, moving into a world where passwords are being viewed increasingly as a vulnerability. And so I think those security issues, and then the privileged access management space, super user access to accounts are things that absolutely need to be reviewed in the modern enterprise. And then making all that as user friendly as possible. So one of the things that we encounter commonly is user dissatisfaction, because now all of a sudden, where they just had to enter a username and password, they're being prompted for an OTP and MFA in addition to that. And so how do you make that user experience actually easier? And there's tools for that. For example, at OneLogin, we have what we call adaptive authentication, where as we learn more about the user, we can actually say, okay, once we have a risk score based on accesses to a known system and a known browser and other kind of attributes of that authentication, we can lower the threshold and not require OTP, for instance, for the user to log in. Or we can use other products at OneLogin to do certificate-based authentication and remove the password altogether. So increasing the user experience while also improving your security threshold.
Yeah, Gary, I always remember the conversation we had up in Minneapolis with the woman who was running an identity and access management program there, and she said, I feel like the past 6 months I've been walking around in cement boots. And I just thought, she had a different set of problems, right? She had an immediate set of issues she had to deal with, and her legacy solution had her moving across her organization extremely slowly. We've got another very good question that just came in, and this is for both Mandar and Gary. Can I start an access management transformation with just one application, or do I need to overhaul my entire environment?
Mandar, you want to try that one first?
Sure. The question is, can I start my identity access management with just one application, right? Yeah.
In other words, I want to transform my access management solution. Yes. Can I start with one application, or do I really need to do a big bang? Right?
No, absolutely. Because if you look at the basic steps that you want to do in access management, when you do a unified view to access management, you really need to, define policies. You need to have the right role-based access mapped to the application-level access. So it's actually, when you look at it, it's actually like setting up a framework. And within that framework of user provisioning, user lifecycle management, and governance, it's one application, later 2 applications, 3 applications, and many more applications. So it's always a scalable and expandable system. It's always never too late. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Mando, I guess you could start with, if you wanted to, you could start with Oracle EBS, right?
Yes. You can start with Oracle EBS. Look for the most complex application. That would serve the purpose.
Yeah. Now, Gary, I got a great question for you and Mandar here, and I've been wanting to ask this one all along. When we sit down with a lot of enterprises, we usually spend a number of hours, a number of days, trying to understand their current state. And we're sort of always holding out there in the air this vision of the future where everything will become easy. It'll all be SAML, it'll all be SCIM. But they're sort of stuck in the bog, if you will. So this question is, how should an organization plan their migration from existing on-premise IAM systems like Oracle Access Manager, CA SiteMinder, to one login in the cloud? I mean, Gary, you've been through this, so you know exactly what he's asking. What would you recommend? What are the best experiences, or what are your experiences? What are best practices?
Yeah, it's a very big question, and I'll simplify. Yeah, exactly. I'll simplify the answer in saying that the seeds of it were actually in the previous question. Can we begin with one application? And that's actually the recommended approach. We've talked a number of times in this conversation about, creating a plan, and the plan, would be comprehensive for all your applications, but trying to do a kind of a big bang approach and doing a whole bunch of applications, especially with your first applications, is actually a fairly risky way to do things. And sometimes even you may have a new application that you roll out, and so you create the new infrastructure that you're going to deploy in, and then take that new application and deploy into it, and kind of exercise your muscles that way, get some practice in, and then begin to kind of fold in the other applications. And each application is probably going to have a different set of criteria if it's hosted under LAM, if it's a security silo, if it has a common backend Active Directory database, if it's got its own SQL database. There's a myriad of things that, each application could have that's kind of slightly different from other application or application groups. And so you just, in some cases, we've seen organizations where they had, for instance, 150 Cold Fusion applications under CA SiteMinder, and because they were all the same, all 150 of those applications actually were easily ported, once it was known what needed to be done to kind of create the context that those applications needed.
Real quick, Aaron, what about migrating? Yep. What about migrating policies? I know there's always a lot of fear around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, tools that might be provided by the vendor to be able to look into the current policy infrastructure and then automate the migration of those into policies for the new environment are part of what should be considered. And so if you have very few applications, it may be a very simple process. But certainly if you have a lot of applications, then that needs to be part of the plan.
Quick question from Mandar from one of our audience members. How is end-user access for databases handled? And that's Mandar or Gary. Mandar?
But can you elaborate that when you say end-user access for database?
That's all I got from the audience. How is end-user access for databases handled?
So is it access to the databases itself?
I'm taking it as access to it.
Well, I can take that one, very quickly. It could mean a lot of different things, but in that diagram that you showed, Chris, earlier of the journey, the customer's IGA journey, there's actually a rectangle in there for FGA, which is fine-grained access control. Yep. And it showed 3 databases kind of connected to that, and that's an example of a very specific need. But we have a partner at OneLogin, Axiomatics, that we can bring in that can actually do that fine-grained access control and make that part of kind of the overall environment and solution that we provide to customers.
Exactly.
So again, different organizations will have different needs where they want to actually kind of pass the policy all the way down to the database level. Other organizations may just have that at the web tier, web application tier, and they're not as concerned where they use kind of shared administrator or super user level accounts to access the databases.
One last question for Gary and Mandar. How does OneLogin integrate with SSH when an admin needs to gain access to an instance?
Yeah, so at OneLogin, we have a number of different APIs and protocols that Cloud Directory supports and front ends with. And I'll mention two of those, Radius and LDAP. We have what we call VLDAP product. And so we can actually store SSH keys up in the OneLogin cloud as part of the user record, and then make those available to be queried from a PAN module within a Linux system is typically what people are using when they're talking about SSH access. And so now the SSH keys become centralized with user identity. And when we're talking about the flows that Mandar mentioned of provisioning and deprovisioning users, to OneLogin, once you terminate the relationship at OneLogin, those keys go away, and then all the access to the systems that user had access to previously via SSH goes away.
Fantastic. Gary, Mandar, I think we have concluded our hour. I want to thank everyone in the audience for your time, your consideration, as well as your questions. I hope you found this productive, informative. I think we should definitely do it again, Gary. There's a lot to cover here. Mandar, thank you very, very much.
Thank you all. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks to the audience.
Thank you, Chris and Mandar.
Yep. It's a great pleasure.